Hi guys, welcome back to the Library of Alexandria. And today I will be reviewing Boosh, Augustus by John Williams. I first discovered John Williams because my buddy Jimmy over at the Fantasy Network recommended Stoner to me, which is one of Williams's 4 novels, and it was free on Audible, so I listened to it. And Stoner really hit me about halfway through and really resonated with me, and I knew that I loved the way that John Williams wrote. Like, it is hard to describe, but I very much like the manner in which Williams writes. Like, I love his prose. I just love the way that he tells a story and describes things and the themes that he hits, etc. And when I found out that he had written a book called Augustus that is actually about Augustus, I thought it was going to be some kind of metaphor. No, it's actually about Augustus. I had to read it, and so I had been wanting to do a read along with my patrons for some time, and so I suggested Augustus, and people agreed, and we have read it, and most of us really, really, really enjoyed it. And man, what a book. What a book. Without wasting any more time.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears.
Let's talk about Augustus. So the first thing you need to know is that you will have a different experience being aware of Roman history versus not being aware of Roman history. Now, people like Kate, Evie, Joanna had no background in Roman history at all, and they loved this book. So it is possible to enjoy this without having that knowledge. But for me, having that background knowledge just elevated this book beyond anything I could have imagined. First thing you need to know is this book is also written in epistolary format, so the whole thing is told in letters. There is not a single bit of this book that is not told via letters. And there tend to be like several different viewpoints that it jumps back and forth with for each part. It's broken up into 3 sections. Book 1 is Octavius's rise to power. Book 2 focuses on Augustus's reign and how it affects the people near him, most of all his daughter that he ends up having to exile. That's not spoilers. The very first letter in book 2 is from his daughter, and she's like, hey, I'm exiled. You figure out why later. And then the much shorter book 3, which is all of those events that we saw from Augustus's perspective himself. And this structure works so well. Like, everything builds on everything else. Each one talks about a different part of Augustus's life viewed from the outside. And in each part, there are, again, a handful of different perspectives that just kind of swap off. It jumps forward and backward in time a lot but it has the date. Every time it jumps forward and back, it has the date. So you always know when it's being written, when each letter is being written. And so part 1, the prologue opens with a letter from Julius Caesar, who was Augustus's great uncle. And Caesar only has 2 letters in this entire book because, Augustus can't begin his ascension until Caesar is murdered on the 15th of March, 44 BC. But from the opening letter of Julius Caesar, I was sold. Williams encompasses the very essence of Julius Caesar in just these 2 letters. It tells you everything you need to know about Caesar as a person and as a politician, just in those 2 letters. It is so brilliant. His opening letter to Attia, his niece, is saying, hey, you should send your son, Octavius, you should send him to here, and I'll watch after him, and, he's learned how to do this and this and this, etc., etc. You're like, oh, for everything. And then, like, 2 paragraphs from the end, he hits her with, like, I know it sounds like I was asking, but I'm definitely not. You're going to do this. I'm the most powerful man in Rome. I've given you an order. If you don't want to, I will absolutely crush your family name, and I will grind you into the dust. And then the very next sentence is, I hope you're doing well. And it's just like, that's who Caesar was. Like, it's so good. Even from the prologue, just sold. And one thing that Williams just excels at in this is each letter is in a different voice. It never feels like the same person is writing a letter, ever. The poet Mycena'S, really all of the poets, all of the philosophers and the poets that are writing speak in kind of elevated language compared with Marcus Agrippa, who was a career soldier, very to the point, terse, just recounting facts, none of this lofty purple prose that appears in, say, Mycena'S and Horace and Ovid's perspectives. And so this first section catalogs the rise of Octavius to power after his great uncle is killed. And there's actually a found family in this, which is really cool. Augustus was a brilliant politician and a brilliant HR rep. Like, he knew how to hire the exact perfect people for the jobs that they needed. He's got two childhood friends that are instrumental in his rise to power. You've got Mycena'S, who is his propaganda minister, and in this, Mycena'S, he pretends to be like this effete fop who's just like, oh, why would I care about that? Oh, I couldn't get my nails dirty. Like that. And then but he's actually like really, really serious and very, very skilled at what he does. Mycena'S, even when Augustus rose to power, Mycena'S even refused senatorial rank. He never wanted to be a senator. He never wanted to be a politician himself, but he is in charge. He's Augustus' propaganda minister. And so we see Mycena'S, writing things and anonymously and passing out anonymous leaflets that increase Octavius's power. And he's also responsible for cultivating a stable of talented authors and poets who then are state-sponsored. They are patroned by Mycena'S, but the stuff that they produce, much of it is in service of Augustus and his reign. Augustus was very, very keen on image and propaganda and maintaining order that way, and maintaining and reaping his legacy that way. And then you've got Agrippa, Marcus Agrippa, who is always just does not get enough of his due. He is the one that won all of Octavius's wars. Octavius would never become Augustus without Agrippa. Agrippa was a brilliant soldier. He won all the major battles, even while Octavius, who was a sickly kid, is like having bowel problems or having a nervous breakdown on the beach while Actium's taking place. Whatever. And so you see these guys, they unite, and they're kids. Octavius is 18 or 19 when Caesar dies. And they're all young, and they have to kind of play with the big dogs. And so this first section is kind of a political intrigue narrative, because we've got these kids who they lean into being underestimated. They know that people are going to think nothing of them because they're kids, and so they lean into that, like, oh, right? Okay, yeah, really. While trying to undermine their opponents without it being noticed that that's what they're doing, because as soon as anybody realizes that these guys are competent and a threat, they will try to, crush them. So they have to pretend like they're not a threat for long enough to where they can actually get the power to defend themselves. And in this first section, it's really Mycena'S letters that are the most telling and the most moving, because Mycena'S is writing to Livy, who is the biographer or the historian during Augustus' time, who wrote like the biggest history of Rome that we know. It was 143 books. Only 35 have survived, which sucks. But Mycena'S is recounting everything that happened on their rise, and Mycena'S is tired. Like, he's tired of having to answer these questions all the time, because everyone, because he's Augustus' friend, everyone wants to know what they did. Everyone always wants to know about Augustus. Everyone always wants, and he's tired and sad of constantly having to recount these things. They did rise to power, but they rose to power on the backs of Romans, like their countrymen. The Romans were fine with any barbarian, any foreigner, any foreign land that they had to cut down. That was fine. But Roman versus Roman it always was something that they didn't want to do. And, Caesar fought civil wars, then Augustus had to fight civil wars, and so Mycena'S is just regretting the fact that he always has to talk about how he and Augustus and Agrippa rose to power, and he's just tired of it. Like, he's tired, and he's sad. And so in this first part, this political masterclass, we learn the delicate balance of having to play both sides when you're in danger. Like, you could transplant modern day politics and set it on top of what's happening here right in 1st century BC Rome, because one of the main themes in this first part is kind of the hypocrisy of politics and the necessity of that hypocrisy in politics, and just how absurd the whole institution is. How overthrowing one institution really just creates a new version of the same thing. Mycena'S laments that they were wiser when they were kids, when they didn't worry about this stuff, because one of the running themes is this conflict between realpolitik, like what's happening, what is actually happening, and the poets and the philosophers, and this daring to dream, daring to imagine that things could be better, and just the creation of art and music and verse and stories that elevate mankind itself. You actually compare it with the Greeks and the Romans, where the Romans have no use for truth, which is what the philosophers and the poets were trying to get at. They have no use for truth except for what can truth get them. The Romans were always very concerned with the end. What is this going to accomplish? Very much like we are nowadays. While the Greeks thought that philosophy and art and poetry and theater was itself an end, that delving into the human experience, and that was an end of itself. And that dovetails a lot into this idea of being free and being able to having the liberty and the privilege to be able to ponder all these things versus being crushed by the weight of duty here. There's a great paragraph here where Caesar himself is talking about like the hypocrisy of the Republic. How long have we been living the Roman lie? Ever since I can remember, certainly, perhaps for many years before. And from what source does that lie suck its energy so that it grows stronger than the truth? We have seen murder, theft, pillage in the name of the Republic, and call it the necessary price we pay for freedom. Cicero deplores the depraved Roman morality that worships wealth, and himself a millionaire many times over, travels with 100 slaves from one of his villas to another. A consul speaks of peace and tranquility, and then raises armies that will murder the colleague whose power threatens his self-interest. The Senate speaks of freedom and thrusts upon me powers I do not want, but must accept and use if Rome is to endure. Is there no answer to the lie? I have conquered the world and none of it is secure. I have shown liberty to the people and they flee it as if it were a disease. I despise those whom I can trust and love those best whom would most quickly betray me. And I do not know where we're going, though I lead a nation to its destiny. What Caesar's saying right there is just indicative of the whole book, of this contrast, this juxtaposition between what is freedom? Why do we want it, but secretly not? Why does the Republic say that these are its values, and yet none of the values that it claims it holds dear are actually the values that it puts into practice? It's just the hypocrisy of the political system. Cicero even talks about that loyalty to our party must overrule our natural inclination. There's just this factiousness within the Republic, this idea that the political thing supersedes the right thing, supersedes what the people actually want. It talks about the irony of the Senate constantly claiming to be for the people and doing things that the people want. Oh, we're doing this for the people. We killed Caesar for the people. And yet, time and time again, it seems like the people don't actually want the thing that the Senate says that they did for the people. For example, the tyrannicides have to flee. If the tyrannicides were really doing what the people wanted, which is the death of Caesar, why did they have to run? Wouldn't they be safe in the city? Because the people wanted them to kill Caesar, so they've done what the people wanted, so why aren't they safe? It's this constant, and we hear this all the time in our own society. We are constantly being told it is being done, it's being done for the people. To paraphrase John Adams in 1776, Dickinson, what would you know about what the people want? Cicero, by the way, his letters are brilliant because he's just so pompous. He's so pompous, and it's just the underestimation that he does of Augustus through these letters is absolutely brilliant. And this paragraph from Mycena'S letter really kind of sums up this whole thematic thing. What you seem so willing to accept even now is this, that the ideals which supported the old republic had no correspondence to the fact of the old republic, that the glorious word concealed the deed of horror, that the appearance of tradition and order cloaked the reality of corruption and chaos, that the call to liberty and freedom closed the minds even of those who called to the facts of privation, suppression, and sanctioned murder. We had learned that we had to do what we did, and we would not be deterred by the forms that deceived the world. That the republic that they serve, the republic for which everyone is fighting, doesn't actually bear a resemblance to what the republic looks like in fact. But this book is big on, does that mean that those ideals aren't worth fighting for, even though they don't have a basis in reality? And so part 2 opens with Augustus' daughter Exiled, and Julia. I have never liked Julia as a historical figure because when you're following Augustus's story, Julia is just defying Augustus at every turn, and Augustus is trying to, like, make something out of this chaos, and he finally has to exile Julia. Julia is such an incredibly sympathetic character in this. I take back everything bad I ever said about Julia. In this section, it is so good. Like, even if the first part about politics and battle and the rise to supremacy is not your favorite, I don't think, if you're a thematic reader, you cannot enjoy parts 2 and 3. Just like he has in Stoner, we have a really, really complex relationship between a father and a son, and a daughter, Augustus and his daughter Julia. We see the choices that Augustus has to make to try to rule, and we see his daughter being the daughter of the emperor. She constantly refers to herself as daughter of the emperor. The choices that she has to make, even though she was really never given a choice on what kind of life she wanted to live. So the themes of power and of duty are so thick in these two. It is absolutely brilliant. First of all, we see Augustus in part 2 through everyone else's eyes. And Augustus, he doesn't smile, he doesn't laugh, he doesn't take a bunch of joy in anything. He's always very, very serious. He takes everything very serious. From a side wager, like, I'll bet you $5 that this faction wins the chariot race. He takes everything so incredibly serious because heavy is the head that wears the crown. Augustus, he has to take everything so seriously because any mistake can bring the entire house of cards crumbling down. We see the agonizing pain and loneliness that power and duty bring about. Augustus, though he was a sickly child, outlives every one of his friends, and there is this profound sense of loneliness with Augustus that as he survives all of his friends, the only people he can trust in this endeavor, the only people he could trust were his companions, were Mycena'S and Agrippa, but they all die. He outlives all of them, and so he's just lonely. All of his friends are gone. He can't make new friends because you can't make friends as the emperor. It's just like if you won the lottery, you would suddenly be suspicious of anybody that wanted to be your friend. This is the similar situation that Augustus finds himself in. He has this great sense of loss, and it's just so hard to reconcile because Augustus has conquered the world, basically, and yet, what does he have? His daughter is exiled. He has really nothing left. He's lost everything in the endeavor, and was it worth it? But that was his duty. His duty was to Rome. Rome was his true love. Rome was his first child. Rome, he did everything and gave everything up for the city, but the city will never love him back. And that is just, there is just this emptiness that fills Augustus that you can just feel, both from other people and from when Augustus is writing himself. The idea that duty, that what we're doing for the future is greater than our own desires, greater than our own wants. About how when we are in positions of power, there are certain things that we have to do. It is our duty to do, and doing that duty requires you sublimating what you want. Your duty and the future, and Rome in this case, is more important than your individual needs. And if you at any point stop and pursue your own desires, your own wants, what you want for your life, especially if you're in the position like Julia, where you didn't ask to be put in this position, then you are suddenly vilified and demonized and basically destroyed because you wanted to live your life in a way that wasn't what duty required. And that is the great tragedy with Julia, because Julia falls afoul of Augustus's morality laws. When Augustus was emperor, he passed a bunch of morality laws that were supposed to bring Rome back to its, old virtues of the early republic before everything became corrupt in the late republic. And she falls afoul of that, and there is this, probably my favorite lines in the whole thing is Horace, the poet, writes to Augustus and says, "What are you doing? Like, he gets these harsh adultery laws, like the woman can be killed, and these marriage laws, like you can't marry, like no Roman can marry like a slave or a prostitute or an actor or any of those things. These really harsh laws dealing with sex and marriage." And Horace is like, what are you doing? Like, listen to me, you should not pass these laws. No one's going to follow them, and it's just going to backfire, and then your enemies are going to use the backfiring against you. And this covers something that is so near and dear to my heart in the fact that what Horace is basically saying, he says that Just because the law, you're not going to make them stop doing it. They're not going to listen to you. You're in charge. It's the job of the poets and the philosophers who don't have any power. It's our job to change people's mind and change people's behavior. We're the ones that can do it. And that is so true. You cannot legislate behavior. You can't. And please, before you're like, yeah, nothing should be, no, stop. Yes, even if things are illegal, people are still going to do it. Yes, people are still going to do things that are illegal. I am not saying that nothing should be illegal because it can't stop everything. That's a ridiculous argument. Why don't you just turn on the TV and watch politics for just a minute and watch someone make that stupid argument. But what I'm saying is that while you might be able to stop a certain amount of people from doing it, you can't stop people from wanting to do it. You cannot legislate away what is in people's hearts. In order to get people, if you ever want people to stop doing something, if you ever want us as a society to stop doing something, passing laws is not the way. You have got to change the heart, change the way that society thinks about things, and then the behavior will change. And what Horace is saying is that's the job of the poets. That's the job of the philosophers. It's their job to show mankind what they could be, to elevate them to a better place. That's the job. That is the job of the arts. That is the job of education and of thinking. And we have lost that. We have become the Romans, where the only purpose is what can come out of it. What is the practical gain from this? And we don't care about the arts and about philosophy. Anytime any politician or anybody really wants to make fun of someone's major that they're studying in college, they will say philosophy. They'll say philosophy or poetry. Two things that we revile in this country. And I don't even like poetry, and I still think poetry is important. We don't have... I guess we still have a poet laureate, but we don't have a stable of national artists that are paid to produce art. We don't have that. And so it is just a profound thing saying that, hey, Augustus, that's not gonna change people's desire to do all this stuff. And also, people are looking at you, you don't follow it anyway. And he doesn't. But what Augustus is trying to do is Augustus is trying to give people something to shoot for. And I'm not gonna spoil book 3 with Augustus, because a lot of the stuff he says is just brilliant. But what Augustus is trying to do is giving people a template, hoping that people can see a better way to do things, something that even though they might miss, they could take into account, that they could try to follow, because someone's got to set a standard. You can't just have no standard. You can't. You can't just, license can't rule. It can't. Everything can't be permitted. Sorry, the assassins. Everything can't. You have to draw a line somewhere, and Augustus is just trying to help the Romans come to this kind of more virtuous place on their own. And it is just, it's so brilliant. But Julia, getting caught up in all of this, with Julia we see duty and power and how it affects men and women differently. The difference, we've already seen with Augustus, the difference between their private life and their public life. And the women, in part 2, we see a lot of letters written from the women, and we see how they have no power. They have no political power in Rome. Instead, they are the collateral damage of these battles for power, these games for power that the men play. The women are either the prizes, the pawns, or the casualties of war. We see what's expected of the women and what's expected of Julia. Julia is expected to be the daughter of the emperor. She's the most powerful woman in all of Rome, and she's expected to behave and conduct herself in a certain way. And Julia longs for the freedom that her friend Terentia, I think it's Mycena'S wife, who doesn't give a crap about power, doesn't care about politics. All she cares about is love, and she's just kind of this ditzy woman who doesn't have that burden of duty and that ambition on her shoulders. So she just flits around from place to place, and she just seems so happy because she has this freedom that Julia can never have. And in the book, she doesn't have, she lacks freedom physically as well because she's exiled on Pandateria. We see how powerful women, even though Julia is the most powerful woman in Rome, and Livia, Augustus's wife, also very powerful. Women cannot exercise their power in the same way that the men can. So we see that a lot of times one of the only ways that they can exert their power is through their bodies and who they sleep with. They have to be so much more indirect with the exertion of power than do the men. We see this heartbreaking journey of Julia, who is this incredibly ambitious woman, and she thirsts for power, and when she has like all the power she could ever want, she realizes it's not enough. How power itself can't satisfy. Just the accumulation of power cannot satisfy the human spirit. And also, even more so than with Augustus, we see the emptiness when all you care about is power. When that power is gone, how empty you feel. Because Julia goes from having all this power where literally every single thing she did mattered. She goes to a place where literally nothing she does matter. She's on this island, doesn't matter what she does. No one cares, no one knows, it doesn't matter. And it is just this massive culture shock. And it is just so brilliant the way that Williams interweaves all of these different themes of duty, of family, of private life versus public life, the hypocrisy of government, of the necessity of poets and philosophers, the trappings and loneliness and loss that comes with long life and incredible power. It is done in a brilliant way. It is written so brilliantly. I immediately wanted to read it again when I was done. I know I've missed even more. I know I've missed a bunch, but I'm planning to have a live show on this where we'll talk about even more of the thematic stuff. It's going to be, this absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. I loved this book more than I thought it was possible to love this book. On the Kingfin approval system, I give this a superb plus easily. Out of 5 stars, I give it 6 stars. Don't know what to tell you. I loved this book so much. I immediately wanted to listen to it again. I still may. I still may. Guys, I cannot recommend this book enough, with an asterisk that it is possible that you might not enjoy this if you do not know anything about the Roman Empire, because part 1 especially is, I can see, might be a little hard to get through as you're trying to remember all the names, because there's a lot of names in that first part, and there's a lot of, it's a lot of like history stuff. And then part 2 and part 3 is the more cerebral, thematic stuff. So if you don't like it as much as I did, like, don't come at me. So guys, anyway, that is it for me for today. This is such a special book. I'm so happy that I got to read it, got to film this review, share this review with you guys. As always, information about my Patreon and Discord is down in the description, and I'll see you next time, guys.